mile equals 63,360 inches. So the number of years that it will take for the Earth to move 1 mile is 105,600 years. So that in order for the Earth to reach where we are at 93 million miles, it would take 9,820,800,000,000 years for the Earth to get here. Likewise, Mars, at 147 million miles away from the sun, it would take 15,780,480,000,000 years for Mars to get where it was. So at a given point, Mars was here in the Goldilocks zone. And now Venus is going to inherit the Goldilocks zone next. The sun will give, Mercury is under a higher pressure because they're still under the mistake thinking that there's a void in space. So they forget that Mercury is under the highest pressure possible. So it can expand. It's like hydrogen. It's like those octaves before hydrogen. So the atmosphere, the iron isn't able to release any oxygen and the oxides. But when you get to 67 million miles away from the sun, the pressure is a little less, but it's still so much higher than the pressure on Earth. It's like going deep into the very belly of the Earth. That pressure is so very high. And so now the clouds, there's a great deal of sulfur, there's a great deal of ammonia and all of those things in it. But once Earth moves to where Mars is, Venus is going to slowly move and will be right here. You know, in maybe 5 or 6 trillion years, Venus will be right here, and humanoids will appear again and unwind the same way. And that asteroid belt that we have right now between Mars and Jupiter, that used to be a planet. And I believe that they had humanoids that developed on there, the same way that everything, that's the periodic table. They call it the periodic table because these things happen according to periodicity. They happen under regular events. You change the motion and pressure conditions, the crystallization changes. We call it a different element, but it's the same substance. Like my hand is one substance, but if I do it like this and do it like this and do it like this, it looks like a whole different thing. And they can call it a different element, but it's the same element under different motion and pressure conditions. I believe that Sirius used to be a planet when it was here, and the humanoids on there didn't recognize that we don't have a solid core. Everything expands as a sphere, and no sphere in our universe, no bubble has a solid core. We're perceiving it as a solid core, but there's not a solid core there. There's just a bubble. And at CERN, that Hadron Collider, that particle accelerator, I believe they did the same thing, and they popped their planet. And it became that asteroid belt.
Through space, and
it's inanimate.
Collects via gravity, and the more mass, the more gravity.
It's supposed to, but look at take a balloon. Another thing that kills gravity. Gravity is supposed to be the greater the mass, is the greater the attractor. You take a balloon, you rub it on your leg, you put it over the ground. Watch the dust particles jump off the ground, off this big mass called the Earth, and jump onto that balloon. Because why? Electricity is 137 times stronger than the pull of gravity or the effects of the so-called gravity. It's the electric force that's the attractive force. It's the electric force that tightens everything together as the masculine, and then the dividing force is the radiative force, the magnetic field. It oblates and pushes everything out, and then they collect together again. But where these things meet, at the proper angles of incidence, like the Birkeland currents talked about, those plasma currents talked about, those angles of incidence is at 120 degrees when it converts it back into electricity, and it will keep collecting and coming and making life. The planet isn't a dead thing. It didn't just happen to come together. That's just the process by which it was given life. It's alive.
When you say rebuild the periodic table, what do you mean specifically?
Well, the way the periodic table is laid out, the periodic table they have now,
Let's see.
It looks like a box.
Image of it.
It looks like a straight box. But they don't show that hydrogen has the same tone as carbon.
What do you mean by tone?
Same tone, same key of E. Same key of E. 40.5 hertz. The next one would be like 81 hertz. You go to silicon, it will double up and would be 162 hertz. You'll go to cobalt and it'll be 324 hertz. It's take the angles of incidence or the tones that they create, their color. Like you can turn color back into sound based upon it's the same wavelength, it's just twice as long or much longer. So all you have to do is keep dividing light by 2. You keep dividing light by 2 and you'll ultimately get back to the audible sound of it, because there was a relationship between light and color, sound and tone, matter and shape. Walter Russell's periodic table that he put together. Now you compare that to Mendeleev's periodic table and you'll see something completely different. It's unwinding.
Whoa.
And you see there's a relationship that hydrogen.
So you had figured this out at a young age?
I had already seen this. This was all inside of that palace. I had access to it, and I knew the relationship.
So you saw this in dreams?
I saw it as a circle. Everything was a full circle laid out, and each area was just expanding, like wrapping a rag around your hand. The first wrap, it's so tight. This is how I saw it more so, but as a vortex, you'll see there's a relationship between hydrogen, carbon, silicon, cobalt, rhodium. They're all bonded. They're all sit as the middle point between two noble gases. So those things don't really exist. It's only one substance. Now the problem is the first thing that we're able to perceive is hydrogen. That's the first visible element, because before it is too dense for us to perceive it. You understand what I'm saying? As you reach into the next octave, the carbon octave, and they call that a bisexual tone, because the carbon has 2 tones to it. It has a negative side and a positive side. The part where lithium behaves, lithium is contractive. Beryllium is contractive. Boron is contractive, but the moment you get to carbon, you balance it out. Gets to a perfect balance of plus and minus 4. So it's a double tone. Nitrogen is -3, oxygen is -2, fluorine is -1. Now the balance of this, all of those are mates. Fluorine and lithium naturally mate. If you have lithium bonded with any other element, the moment that fluorine is introduced, it will break all bonds violently so it can bond with fluorine. Same thing with beryllium and oxygen. That's why it said, and what they've tried to keep from us, if you want to break water into its component parts of hydrogen and oxygen, all you have to do is introduce beryllium or the sound of beryllium, and oxygen will violently break away from any other thing, even hydrogen, to bond with that beryllium.